Hello, and welcome to the second half of our Great Depression discussion. Uh, in class, we talked about kind of the first New Deal. We looked at FDR being elected and his goals for Reconstruction, which were the three R's: relief, recovery, reform. And we talked about a lot of the programs of his first New Deal programs, and a lot of those put people to work. Things like the PWA that put hundreds of thousands of men to work. Talk about the CCC, again, putting men to work, single, unmarried men to work. We talked about the FDIC, which reformed banking and made it safe for people to put money in banks again so that banks can continue to loan money to individuals and restart our economy. We looked at the TVA, which also put people to work more in the Tennessee Valley region, which was the poorest in the area. The NRA, National Recovery Administration, even though it was found to be unconstitutional. AAA, the Agricultural Adjustment Act, which also was found to be unconstitutional, which kind of helped out farmers. With the success of the first New Deal in the first couple 100 days, or 100 days specifically, and then later on, FDR, with his popularity and his support of Congress, decides to follow that up with what is known as the Second New Deal. And the Second New Deal is going to be a lot of the same. Only going to be maybe a little bit more aggressive with those. But remember the two acts that we had that were unconstitutional. That's going to come up later on when we look at maybe his disagreements with the Supreme Court and why he disagreed with the Supreme Court. So let's talk about the Second New Deal. One of the first big programs that was passed in the Second New Deal, I guess we kind of go back. 1934 was midterm elections. And this was, anytime you have a midterm election, you decide whether or not the American public is agreeing with what your administration has done. So if the Democrats win big in the midterms, that means that the American public like what's going on with the Democrats and with what FDR is doing. And the midterm elections were, again, big victories for the Democrats. And so you're going to see that as a mandate for FDR to continue on his New Deal programs. And so by the summer of 1935, which is 6 months into the new term of Congress, he passes the WPA, the Works Progress Administration. And this is specifically an infrastructure bill. Again, a lot like the PWA, the Public Works Administration, this is the Works Progress. And this is mainly infrastructure. Let's put people to work and fix our infrastructure at the same time. But we had a bunch of crumbling bridges. We needed new roads built. We needed new schools, hospitals, all that. And that's what the WPA is going to be for. Very similar to the PWA and the CWA, that it's going to provide jobs. This time, it's a much larger and much broader program. This is going to spend billions of dollars between 1935 and 1940. And at its peak has about 3.4 million Americans, mainly men, few women in there, but mainly men working. Most are going to do construction jobs. Most are going to do, build things like roads and bridges and airports because of the new air travel that we have going on. But in total, I mean, we have over 4,000 new schools built, 130 new hospitals built, 9,000 miles of storm drains and sewer lines. Again, all infrastructure, 29,000 new bridges or fixed bridges, 150 new airfields. We repaired 280,000 miles of roads and planted 24 million trees. So as you can see, this is a massive undertaking and very successful. It doesn't mean that it doesn't have its opponents. Obviously, this is a complete change from 1920s where it was hands-off government. This is government essentially providing a bunch of jobs and becoming much stronger and much more involved. And not everyone's going to like that. One of the other programs with the WPA is going to be the ARTS project. So it's not just infrastructure. When they build schools, when they build city halls, and when they build different city buildings, they employ a bunch of obviously unemployed artists. Artists during the 1930s saw the problem just like everybody else. Nobody's spending their money on art. And so this is a way for the federal government to help out some of those art projects. And we actually have the federal arts project that is put out. This is going to employ artists, actors, writers in a variety of job opportunities. Musicians and actors stage performances that were free to the public. And so they put on plays, they put on concerts that were paid for by the federal government program, the Arts Project, but American public could go to. Since no one's spending some of that discretionary income on concerts or going to plays, they're able to do that. If you look at these two pictures on this screen, the one on the right-hand side over here, that's actually the Sioux Falls City Hall. The Sioux Falls City Hall was redone. That was a WPA project. And they also employed artists to create this mural of art in that. This is another arts project. I'm going to share a website with you that you can look at any city in any state and look at all the WPA or look at all the New Deal projects that were done. And a lot of those are going to be art projects. If you go to most small towns, you see murals on the side of walls that represent the city or represent the area or represent the history of a city. I know my hometown in Lenox had one for years on the side of their Legion, the American Legion building. And that I don't think that was specifically a WPA project, but it was similar to that. That was later on. That I think that was in the 1950s or 60s that was done. But it's not just people that can do construction. They want a well-rounded populace, and so they encourage artists to also be part of this project. And so that was the Federal Arts Project. It's a good video on the WPA. We're not going to watch it obviously in class, but again, you have access to this, so you can watch and you can see all the projects that were done by the WPA. Another issue, obviously, is going to be labor. And the NLRA, which is also known as the Wagner Act, is going to replace the National Industrial Recovery Act, which was found to be unconstitutional. And the Wagner Act guaranteed the right to organize and join unions. Like we saw in the 1920s with open shops, they want to guarantee people the right to join unions. The problem that happened is that most people's wages were cut. And essentially the businesses were like, well, either take a cut in pay or have no pay. And a lot of people don't think that was unfair, especially Roosevelt and the Democrats. And so they not only they allowed people the right to work or guaranteed people the right to work and join unions and collectively bargain, but they also identified business practices that may be deemed to be unfair to labor. And they create the National Labor Relations Board to protect those rights. And so this is kind of an extension. Worried again that it was going to be unconstitutional. And so we're going to look at what Roosevelt does later on to see if that fixes. The longest lasting impact of the New Deal is going to be the Social Security Act. If you look at your paycheck, if you're one of those people that has a job and you look at your paycheck, every single paycheck, you get money taken out for Social Security. And this is a pension program. And if you look at what pension is, it's retirement. So when you retire, you should get some of that money back in the form of monthly payments to encourage you to not work, past a certain year. I think right now it's 64 or 5 that you can start collecting Social Security. But this is a retirement program that should allow you to retire and still get money paid for through Social Security, which essentially is a tax. I don't know if it's technically a tax, but it's basically a tax. And so when you get money taken out of your paycheck every month, that is invested. And then when you retire, that should go to you. Well, originally, obviously, there's no money in the pool. And so you are paying people to retire by taxes that are going out of current workers' salaries. And eventually that is going to create a big enough pool that you are also taking out your own money. You're taking out your own money and help being paid for by that. Now, if you've been paying attention to politics in the last 20 years, we know that Social Security is starting to run dry. People are living longer. Baby boom really hurt that because now a lot of the baby boomers, which we'll talk about later, they're reaching retirement age, and they're starting to really drain that Social Security. And so who knows how long it's going to be around, whether you're going to see it or whether I'm even going to see it. And so Social Security, what they did is they encouraged people to retire, encouraged people that were 60, 62, 65 to retire. That opened up a position for a younger person, a younger man, woman, mainly men, to retire. And so for those that retire, you get their job or you get a job. And so that's just encouraging more employment by paying people off in taxes. And this is something that obviously not a lot of people really completely agreed with. Could be unconstitutional because you're taking tax money of people that are working right now and paying people to essentially retire. And so that Social Security does need to be reformed, absolutely. So the election of 1936, FDR is very popular still, and it's just as much of a butt kicking, if not a bigger butt kicking than it was before. Republicans nominate Alf Landon, who was governor of Kansas. He criticizes the New Deal spending as too much government overreach and too much overspending and deficit spending by the federal government. And FDR basically swept every state but Maine and Vermont. Over 60% of the popular vote. Huge support from workers and farmers because those are people that he helped. And so the election of 1936 became, again, another mandate for President Roosevelt to kind of do his thing. Not everybody agreed with him, though. There were people all over the place that didn't necessarily agree with him. Liberals, who that's what FDR was, they thought that he wasn't doing enough and that a lot of his New Deal spending was too much. Those that were more on the far left in the socialist movement criticized providing too much assistance for businesses and too little for unemployed minorities, women, and elderly. And so that was an issue. Conservatives, again, more Republicans, thought that this was too much power by the federal government, and they didn't like the idea of deficit spending. And the Second New Deal really had a very pro-union stance, and that's not, obviously, if we look at the 1920s, that's not really what they were for. And then you also see a bunch of demagogues. There are three specific demagogues that we'll talk about. Number one is Father Coughlin. Father Coughlin, Charles E. Coughlin, was a Catholic priest who had a weekly radio show that had, I believe it was more than 1 million people turn in to his weekly radio show. And he attacked the unions. He attacked the New Deal. However, he became very anti-Semitic, blamed Jews for a bunch of issues that the Americans were going through, not unlike what Hitler's doing right around the same time. And became very fascist. And if we look at when we look at the rise of Hitler in the 1930s, 33, 34, 35, this is around the same time as he becomes very popular. He tries that here. And so people started kind of going away once he became more of that anti-Semite and fascist. Anti-Semite just simply means anti-Jewish. And so people started kind of tuning away from his radio program. Catholic Church stopped broadcasting it and all that. Second person is Dr. Francis Townsend. And he became very popular before the passage of the Social Security Act. He kind of came up with the idea of Social Security, only more of a radical plan. He proposed that every retired person over 60 would get $200 a month, and payments would come from 2% federal sales tax. He said that this would increase consumer spending and stimulate the economy. And again, this is really the basis for the Social Security Act. And so you can see some of that. So in the Social Security Act, and so his popularity kind of forced the federal government to do something about it. And then finally, you have Huey Long, who was nicknamed Kingfish. He was a senator of Louisiana, and this is his picture on the right-hand side. He starts this Share the Wealth program, and he said that every American should have a minimum income of $5,000 every year, and that there should be a maximum income. Nobody should have more than 50 million. So again, this anti-big business program. So minimum 5,000, then 100% tax anything above 50 million. Obviously, kind of a take from the rich, give to the poor idea. And anything people made above 50 million, he claimed that nobody needs more than 50 million, and that anything above 50 million is taxed 100%. And so most of the payments for this Share Your Wealth program are going to come from taxes on the wealthy. Now, if we look at recently, there have been people that have mentioned this. We've had a couple former presidential candidates mention this about having a basic income for everybody. I think recently it was like $12,000 a year. Everybody should get a $1,000 a month payment, and $12,000 a year besides your paychecks and whatnot, and that would help the economy. So this has been around for a long time. Huey Long even challenged FDR in the 1936, or he was going to be a challenger for the Democratic nominee in 1936. He became quite popular. However, his candidacy ended when he was killed by an assassin in 1935. So maybe a little bit more radical, and people didn't love the idea of taxing the rich. So who knows? I'm sure there's conspiracy theories behind his assassination, whether it's FDR, whether it's big business, whatever it may be. So we get to the court packing. So as you know, there are three branches of government. We have the legislative branch, which is Congress. We have the executive branch, which is the president. And then you have the judicial branch. The legislative branch, you are elected every 2 years or every 6 years. Senators are 6 years, representatives are 2 years. So the people decide in the legislative branch whether or not they want to keep their legislators around. Representatives every 2 years, senators every 6 years. The executive branch is reelected every 4 years. The president is reelected every 4 years. Once again, a chance for the public, based on the needs of the time, that they can decide whether or not they agree or disagree with the president by voting him or her in or not. The judicial branch, those are lifetime appointments. So the Supreme Court is lifetime opponents. And if you remember, we've had mainly Republican presidents basically since Lincoln. And so most of the courts, I believe it was either 7-2 or 6-3 at the time, were I think it was actually 7-2 conservative or Republican nominated Supreme Court justices. So we have a very Democratic Congress, a Democrat president, and a primarily, overwhelmingly Republican court. And as you saw, the court didn't agree with some of what FDR was doing. And so his plan is to pack the court. His plan is to add 6 more justices to the bench to make there 15, to make it be 15. There is 9 right now, to make it be 15. And he obviously would then nominate those 6, and it would be 8-7 liberal. And so that was his idea, is that times have changed and the Supreme Court has not. And so he's trying to dilute the power of those sitting justices that are kind of against him. And he essentially put in a bunch of yes men, people that would vote for his policies. That way he could continue doing these New Deal programs, and there would be no resistance from the courts. Congress completely disagreed. And Congress, who up until now essentially had been a bunch of yes men, and Congress said no, and they did not accept his plan, and this actually hurt some of his popularity. He is going to be reelected 2 more times, but it still hurts his popularity, as you'll see in the 1940 election. But his whole goal was to increase the size of the Supreme Court justice. Now, again, if you've been paying attention in the last 5 years, the same concept has happened. After McConnell didn't allow Obama to choose a replacement for Scalia, and then later on, after McConnell, in the same situation, allowed President Trump to appoint somebody in replacement of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, we saw this in the last 5 years. And there's been talk about court packing. Again, this is not something new, but it's ultimately been something that's been unpopular enough that it hasn't really achieved any traction at all. There's nothing in the Constitution that says there has to be 9 Supreme Court justices. We've actually added Supreme Court justices, but the amount of Supreme Court justices has stayed the same. I'd like to say since the 1830s or 1840s. So we've had 9 for a long time. But he wanted to change that. When we look at unions, obviously the Wagner Act and the National Recovery Act had originally tried to create these more pro-union stances. The CIO, the Congress of Industrial Organization, they tried to organize unskilled workers. The AFL, which we'd already talked about, the American Federation of Labor, was kind of part of that, but they also, the new CIO wanted to expand to include more than just skilled white and males. They wanted to include pretty much everybody. And they focused specifically on unskilled workers in automotive, steel, and textile industries. We also had the Fair Labor Standards Act in 1938, which is passed. That's the last major reform of the New Deal. And that put regulations on business labor practices, but only for interstate commerce. There were a couple strikes. GM had a strike. They had a sit-down strike where they essentially went to work but didn't work. President and governor turned down the company's request for troops to essentially force them to work. Again, kind of a change since the last half of the 19th century that we had. There was also a steel strike that happened at the same time where it became more violent, and 4 people ended up becoming dead. And again, as I talked about already, the Fair Labor Standards Act. In 1937 and 38, there was a recession which kind of caused the New Deal to lose some of that momentum. And because of the recession, because of the taxes on Social Security, spending kind of went down. That had gone up. As you can see by the graph over here, we had about 12% annual growth at the beginning of this. And then when the Social Security Act was passed, we had kind of stagnant growth. And the idea of Keynesian economics and this is by John Maynard Keynes. So if you take economics, you'll hear about or you'll understand Keynesian economics. The idea is that you deficit spend to initiate economic growth. So you put money back into the people, and they put money back into the government through taxes. They spend and taxes go back in. So the idea is this. Now, this probably isn't the greatest, but the idea is that you power yourself. And it's had, there are opponents and there are proponents of all of these different groups. So we do see that kind of lose momentum. Gains back up a little bit after 38 in 1939, but really is not going to see the growth that we had before. So what's life for different groups? Obviously, women. Anytime women had a job, they were accused of taking jobs from men that could provide for their families. And most of the New Deal programs just ignored women. Farmers, we already talked about the Dust Bowl that was going on. The drought just killed farmers. A bunch of Okies moved, Oklahomans who lost jobs moved west to California to farm and work in factories there. If you look at probably the most famous, the Migrant Mother picture, that's of a bunch of Okies or Oklahomans moving to California to find jobs. African American rates obviously had higher unemployment rates than their white counterparts, and most of the relief programs excluded them, just like women. Native Americans, however, did start to see some increases. We had the Indian Reorganization Act of 1934, which is also known as the Indian New Deal, which repealed the Dawes Act. So yay, we finally repealed the Dawes Act. It returned a lot of that land or control of land to the tribes. They also had CCC projects that focused on reservations and giving Indians jobs. And so we did see some improvements for American Indians. The creation of the BIA, or the improvement of the BIA, where they actually, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, where they hired actual Indians rather than a bunch of white people to take control of that. So that's the New Deal. And again, I highly recommend you watch Heimler. He has something for both 7.9 and 7.10. Highly recommend you watch him. But this is the end of the New Deal. This is the end of the Great Depression. We'll see, as you can see, It's had some successes. We put millions of people to work and did stimulate the economy. We dropped our unemployment rate from 25 to about 13%, which is still high, still very high. But it is obviously much better than the 25% that we had. But there are still a lot of Americans that are out of work. There's still a lot of Americans that are struggling day to day, homeless, and all that. And